Have you ever opened your banking app late at night? Not because you needed to, but because you just wanted to check. You already knew the number. You knew it wasn't where you wanted it to be, but you checked anyway. And maybe you felt that familiar tightness in your chest. Not panic exactly, just pressure. The quiet awareness that one unexpected bill could throw everything off. Car trouble, a medical expense, a job shakeup. It doesn't even have to be dramatic, just inconvenient enough to hurt. Now imagine opening that same app and seeing 5 digits, $10,000. Not in investments, not theoretical, just sitting there. What changes? Is it the number, or is it something deeper? Because here's the truth most people miss. Saving your first $10,000 isn't really about the money. It's about what it does to your brain. And once that shift happens, almost everything else starts to move differently. Most people think the goal is a higher income. And income does matter, of course it does. But you've probably noticed something strange. You can make more money and still feel financially fragile. You get a raise, your lifestyle adjusts. You upgrade the apartment, you upgrade the car, you eat out a little more often. Nothing reckless, just slightly better. And suddenly that higher salary feels just as tight as the old one. Because income is a flow, savings is a foundation. And those are psychologically very different experiences. When you don't have savings, every decision feels heavier. You tolerate things you shouldn't. You say yes to extra shifts even when you're exhausted. You hesitate to negotiate your salary. You stay in jobs that drain you because uncertainty feels too dangerous. It's not that you're weak, it's that your nervous system is operating in survival mode. When money is scarce, your brain narrows. Research in behavioral psychology shows that scarcity reduces cognitive bandwidth. You literally have less mental capacity for long-term thinking when you're worried about short-term survival. That's why it feels so hard to think about investing or retirement when rent is due next week. So what happens at $10,000? You move from survival to stability, not wealth, not luxury, stability. And that shift is massive. Let's talk about the math for a second, but in a grounded way. If your essential monthly expenses are, say, $2,500, then $10,000 covers 4 months of basic life: rent, food, utilities, transportation. 4 months doesn't sound like forever, but it's enough. Enough to lose a job and not panic immediately. Enough to take a breath before accepting the first offer. Enough to handle a medical deductible without swiping a credit card at 22% interest. That buffer changes your posture. You stop leaning forward anxiously. You stand up straighter. And that posture shift quietly affects everything. I've seen this over and over. Before $10,000, people make decisions from fear. After $10,000, they start making decisions from choice. Think about work. When you have no cushion, your boss's tone matters more than it should. Office politics feel more threatening. You might avoid advocating for yourself because you can't afford tension. But when you know you could survive a few months without income, you speak differently. Not arrogantly, calmly. There's a subtle confidence that comes from knowing you're not trapped, and people feel that. Your relationships change too. Money stress seeps into conversations. It shows up as irritability, as quiet resentment, as anxiety about small purchases. When you have savings, you don't argue over every grocery bill. You don't spiral over a car repair. The emotional temperature drops. That peace is hard to quantify, but it's real. There's another shift that's even more powerful: time. Before you build savings, time feels urgent. You feel behind. You feel like you have to catch up. Every month that passes without progress feels like failure. But once you see 5 digits sitting there, something interesting happens. You realize you're capable of building. You proved it to yourself. Saving $10,000 isn't accidental. It required discipline, even if imperfect. It required saying no sometimes. It required consistency. And when you see that result, you start trusting yourself differently. It's no longer, I hope I can manage money someday. It becomes, I am someone who manages money. Identity shift. And identity is stronger than motivation. Motivation fades. Identity sticks. Now, I want to be clear about something. $10,000 won't solve all your problems. If you're drowning in debt, it doesn't magically erase it. If you hate your job, it doesn't automatically fix your career. If your spending habits are chaotic, the number alone won't heal that. But it buys you breathing room. And breathing room is where better thinking happens. When your brain isn't scanning for threats, it starts scanning for opportunities. That's when investing starts to make sense. That's when you can actually think about compound growth. If that $10,000 earns even a modest return over time, it begins working quietly in the background. Not dramatically, not explosively, but steadily. And steady is underrated. We're so used to hearing about people doubling money overnight, hitting big wins, flipping assets. But real wealth psychology isn't dramatic. It's boring in the best way. It's stable. It's quiet. It's sleeping at night without checking your bank balance twice. There's also a subtle social shift. When you don't have savings, you're more vulnerable to pressure. Friends planning expensive trips, family expectations, social comparison on Instagram. You might stretch beyond your comfort zone because saying no feels embarrassing. But when you have savings, you understand trade-offs more clearly. You can say, not this time. Not because you're broke, but because you're building something. And that feels different. Here's where the real turning point happens. At $10,000, you stop seeing money purely as consumption. You start seeing it as protection, as optionality, as time. You realize money isn't just about what you can buy. It's about what you don't have to tolerate. You don't have to tolerate a toxic workplace indefinitely. You don't have to tolerate financial chaos. You don't have to tolerate constant anxiety about small setbacks. That realization is powerful because now saving isn't deprivation, it's self-respect. You're not restricting yourself, you're protecting future you. And when you think about it that way, discipline feels less punishing. It feels intentional. So how does someone realistically get there? Not through extreme sacrifice, not through living like a monk for 2 years. It usually happens through steady adjustments. Maybe you automate transfers so you don't rely on willpower. Maybe you increase savings every time your income increases instead of upgrading everything. Maybe you track expenses just enough to stay aware, not obsessed. The key isn't perfection, it's momentum. If you save $500 a month, that's $6,000 a year. With small bonuses or tax refunds added in, you're closer than you think. And if $500 feels impossible, maybe it's $200. The point is consistency. The first few thousand feel slow, painfully slow. Then something interesting happens around the middle. You see progress accelerating because you've built the habit. And habits compound just like money does. Let's talk about the emotional resistance, because it's real. When you're starting from zero, $10,000 feels abstract, almost imaginary. Your brain says that's too far. So you don't start. But you don't need to emotionally feel $10,000. You just need to build the next 1,000, then the next. The brain handles chunks better than mountains. And each chunk builds confidence. Confidence builds action. Action builds results. It's less about brilliance and more about repetition. One of the most underrated benefits of reaching $10,000 is how it changes your risk tolerance. When you have nothing saved, every risk feels dangerous. Starting a side project? Risky. Switching careers? Risky. Investing? Risky. But when you have a cushion, calculated risk becomes possible. You can experiment. You can learn. You can tolerate short-term instability for long-term growth. That's where careers pivot. That's where businesses start, not from recklessness, but from safety. Ironically, stability allows courage.
And here's something subtle. Once you reach $10,000, your goalposts shift. You stop obsessing over surviving the month. You start thinking about net worth, about investments, about how money flows instead of just sits. The conversation inside your head changes. It becomes less, how do I make it through this week, and more, how do I design a life that doesn't feel like a constant scramble? That's a different level of thinking, and it starts with a relatively modest number.
If you're nowhere near $10,000 right now, that's okay. Truly. The point isn't the exact figure. It's the concept of a psychological safety line. For some, maybe it's $5,000. For others with higher expenses, it might be $20,000. The number matters less than the buffer. But $10,000 is a powerful milestone because it's concrete. 5 digits. It feels real. And once you see it, something clicks. You realize you're not behind, you're building. I want to end on this. There's a version of you who doesn't panic when life gets inconvenient. A version of you who doesn't feel trapped by every paycheck. A version of you who makes decisions calmly. That version isn't a different person. It's you with a little margin. That's what $10,000 represents. Margin. Not perfection, not wealth, not freedom from responsibility, just space. Space to think, space to choose, space to breathe. And progress toward that space matters more than the speed. You don't need to sprint. You don't need to impress anyone. You just need to keep stacking small, boring wins. Because one day, you'll open your banking app, and the number won't scare you anymore. It'll steady you. And that quiet steadiness, that's when everything really starts to change.